The time on the radio said 2:03 a.m. After closing the door of her car, Cheryl Myers gave a big, tired yawn, then slowly pulled the seatbelt across her, clicking it in place. She was going home now, having finished an 8-hour shift as a waitress at the Philly Diner in Runnymede. All that was left for her to do now was drive the 11-minute ride home. Inserting her key into the ignition, she started the car, then rested her head back against the seat while waiting for the engine to warm up. It was cold outside, 29 degrees, so she tucked her hands into her jacket pockets until she could get the heater running. As she sat there in the dark with her eyes closed, the cell phone in her purse suddenly began to ring, startling her. Pulling her hands out, she immediately started digging through her bag, trying desperately to locate it before she missed the call. Finding it, she pressed a button on the screen answering, "Hello?" before even placing it against her ear.
"Hey, babe,"
her husband could be heard saying over the phone.
"I just wanted to let you know I was still up waiting for you."
Cheryl smiled. "Hi, hun. I'm already in the car, about to leave."
"Miss you."
he told her. "Miss you too," she replied. "See you in a few minutes."
"Okay, bye."
"Bye," she said as she hung up. Placing the phone on the passenger seat, she turned the heater on. Waving her hand in front of the vent, she could feel hot air blowing out. "Yes," she shouted excitedly to herself. Putting the car into reverse, she backed out of the parking spot and straightened out. Then, after shifting it into drive, she made a left out of the driveway onto the Black Horse Pike. The streets were unusually empty, Cheryl thought to herself as she drove her car towards Belmar. Luckily, all the traffic lights between the diner and NJTP were all green, so her ride home was going to be even quicker than she expected. Passing under the turnpike, the lights on her dashboard flickered a couple times, catching her attention. Scanning her eyes around the instrument dials, everything appeared normal, so she gave it no further thought. Turning her blinker on, she made a left at Wendy's and steered onto Benigno Boulevard. Going through the industrial park was the slowest part of her route home, only because the police were notorious for sitting in the dark, checking for speeders. Knowing where they sat, Cheryl eyed the location as she passed it by. Yes, indeed, one of Belmar's finest was sitting motionless with the lights off. With the cop now well behind her, she felt a little more at ease to step on the gas to try to get home a bit faster. Passing the post office on her way around towards the Sunoco, the street lights flickered, as did the lights of her car. Then suddenly, everything went dark. Plunged into darkness, she let out a scream. Before she even had a chance to react, something then slammed into her car from the passenger side, spinning her vehicle around before it rolled over onto its roof. Then everything went black. When Cheryl came to, she found herself hanging upside down, still strapped into her seat. Held in place by the seatbelt, her entire weight was now bearing down on her waist, and it was causing her a great deal of discomfort. With her head still spinning, she struggled to gasp. What the hell had just happened to her? Did she crash into something, or did something crash into her? Looking around the interior of her car, there was nothing to see. It was just too damn dark. Cheryl cried out as she began to panic. "Help! Somebody!" A deep, vibrating, frightening growl followed. Fear immediately befell her, causing her to become silent. "What the fuck?" she gasped. Her breathing became shallow as she heard the same sound again, but from somewhere else outside the car. Although she was hanging upside down, giving her a perfect view out of all the windows, it was to no avail. The only lights that she could see were coming from the Sunoco gas station about a block away. Suddenly, her car began to move as something pushed the trunk of the vehicle down towards the ground, lifting the front up into the air. Full mode terror set in and she began to hyperventilate. In hopes of scaring whatever it was away, she began laying on the horn. It then occurred to her that honking the horn might also bring help, so she started going crazy with it. Unexpectedly, the car fell forward, and in doing so, it somehow caused the safety belt latch to give way. In an instant, Cheryl fell headfirst onto the roof of her car, seriously hurting her neck. For a moment, she lay still, whimpering, until the growl of the creature brought her back to her senses again. Lying on her back, she struggled to roll over, But just as she turned on her stomach, she froze with terror when she caught the sight of two red, glowing eyes with a set of teeth looking at her through the driver's side window. She let out a scream. She backed away just a mere second before the creature smashed its twisted claws through the glass in an attempt to grab her. Brushing pieces of glass from her bloodied face, she opened her eyes and found it was gone. Twisting her body from one side to another, she frantically looked out all the windows in hopes of spotting the creature's whereabouts. Just then her cell phone began to ring, scaring the shit out of her. Looking around for it, she found her overturned purse in the dark. As she pulled on the handle, she inadvertently caused its contents to spill out, revealing the light of the cell phone. She let out a panicked cry as she reached for it, but the call ended before she could answer it. No! Just then, the creature roared with agitation as it struck the car with such force it caused it to spin around 1.5 times. In the rotation, Cheryl was catapulted to the back of the car, only to find herself pressed up against the back window, face first when everything came to a stop. Looking out the window into the cold blackness, Cheryl could sense the creature approaching. That's when she spotted its terrifying eyes in the darkness, causing her blood to instantly turn cold as ice. Suddenly, the overhead streetlights began to flicker, revealing images of some kind of long-haired being moving on all fours, looking more like a large bush with roots for legs than anything else. Pushing herself away from the rear window, she crawled to the center of the car. Realizing that she still had the phone in her hand, she began dialing 911. As she waited for someone to answer her call for help, she kept looking for the beast, but the street lamp stopped blinking again.
911, what's your emergency?
Cheryl started screaming at the top of her lungs, crying hysterically, unable to describe her situation.
Ma'am, calm down. I can't understand you.
The emergency dispatcher explained.
Are you in need of police assistance?
Cheryl placed the phone right up to her mouth and shouted into it, "Yes!" The creature roared again. Just then, the back window exploded inward, raining thousands of pieces of glass all over Cheryl. Too terrified to look behind her, she crawled frantically towards the front window, cutting her hands and knees as she fled for her life. From the front window, she could see a police car stopped at the end of Benigno Boulevard with its flashing lights on. Slapping the glass with her bloody hands, she screamed at the top of her lungs, hoping against hope that they might hear her. Just then, she remembered the flashlight built into her phone. Wiping the tears from her eyes, she struggled with her injured, shaking hands to find the app for it. After multiple tries at turning it on, she finally got it working. Aiming the beam of light out the window, she flailed the phone from side to side. "Help me!" Down at the end of Benigno Boulevard, a Belmar police officer sitting in the driver's seat answered a call from dispatch. "Unit 21, Johnson here. Go ahead," the officer spoke into the mic. Dispatch answered.
Unit 21, we got a report of a woman in need of assistance. She says she's trapped in a car overturned on Benigno Boulevard. Please investigate.
"Unit 21, I'm on it." Lowering the mic, Johnson glanced down Benigno Boulevard and immediately spotted a flashing light. "Jesus," he blurted out. From the passenger seat, his partner glanced down the road into the industrial park. "I see it," he said. Throwing their cruiser into drive, Johnson floored the gas pedal and raced down the dark towards the beam of light. Through the broken back window, the creature reached in and grabbed a hold of Cheryl by the left leg. Petrified, she instantly took hold of the steering wheel with her left hand and started kicking wildly at its claws with her other leg. Screaming at the top of her lungs as she fought to free herself, she continued waving the flashlight out the windshield, hoping against hope she could hold on for just a few seconds more until help arrived. But its strength was more than she could fight against. With one mighty tug, the creature ripped her out of the car. Skidding sideways to a stop, the police cruiser came to a halt in front of the overturned vehicle. Turning on the spotlight, Johnson aimed it at the car. As the creature dragged Cheryl across the asphalt, then onto the grass, she could see the police officers as they exited their car. "Help me!" she cried out in terror, trying desperately to get their attention. Standing in front of the overturned vehicle, the two officers stared at the jagged claw marks torn into the body of the car. "What the hell?" gasped Johnson as he examined the wreckage in disbelief. Just then, both officers reacted to something off to their right moving across the grass in the dark. Pulling their weapons, they raised their flashlights and cautiously went to investigate. Sinking, legs first, into the ground, Cheryl desperately clawed at everything to save herself from going under. "Help me!" She cried out in terror as the officers stepped up to her with their flashlights pointed in her face. But it was clear. They could not see her. And then she was gone. A cell phone lying in the grass with its screen lit up caught Johnson's attention. Holstering his weapon, he immediately knelt down and looked at it. For a split second, he thought he heard a woman's muffled screams. But then there was nothing. "Did you hear that?" he asked his partner. "Hear what?" After shining the beam of his flashlight around and finding nothing out of the ordinary, he stood back up and looked at his partner. Nothing. Then in unison, they turned and walked back towards the shredded car in the street.